I just told Dave, I said, I'm gonna go old school, and Dave says, what did you say, Dave?
Suick?
I said, not that old school. He's like,
Toad.
I grabbed a toad. Little did I know in 2018 when I received my first Lake X toad, which happened to be this one right here, which I've since retired, did I realize that this lure was going to dramatically change the way I fish rubber baits and some dive and rise, you know, by extension. But the Lake X toad, when it came onto the market, a lot of people thought it was this. It was just a replacement for the Medusa, and we thought that too a little bit. And I think when I first got the first couple toads, we started ripping them a lot like a Medusa, and that didn't really work for us initially. We had to kind of change how we used them, and nothing was more vital to that than us getting some underwater footage and seeing exactly how the toad looked in the water. And that for us was that big moment of, we do have to work this a little bit differently. I received my first toad in 2018. One of my buddies, actually my buddy Steve Smith, who owns Sunset Country Adventures Camp on Edward Lake, picked this one up, I believe at the Chicago show for me. He was down there promoting his camp, and this one was there. I picked up a all black one at Thorne Brothers that year. And after we did our underwater footage, we realized that it required a slower pull, let it drop, pull, let it drop. Not that exaggerated, really quick, hard ripping motion that guys like my buddy Matt Vavrock does in this video here with a Medusa. And I asked Matt to send me a couple of his clips because he's had so much success with Medusas over the years that a lot of people use a Medusa in this style, especially around weeds. They just rip them hard through the weeds, and you get those awesome reactionary strikes from muskies like this clip here. The early toads were, and even John will admit this, they were a little bit unpredictable. You had to do a little bit of tuning. You had to twist the eye. This one you might not be able to see it, but I got the eye twisted over quite a bit to get it to run straight. This one here is pretty much dead center. I do have a little bit of a twist in it. And then this one here, I added a split ring just to attach to my leader, and this one runs really good. But you had to tune the early ones. By 2019, John and Jake were getting a lot better at making sure the harnesses were installed perfectly. They got a lot easier to use, but that first batch or that first year, people complained on them being a little bit unpredictable. But when you got them tuned in, and again, going back to our footage, we could tell which ones were running perfect. And I started to adopt that really slow, cast it out, pull it up, let it fall, pull it up, and it almost always hit just on that slack line on the fall. And in 2018, I caught a ton of fish on this original Bullfrog one. I'll include some pictures here of how much I had to rebuild this one. It almost doesn't even look like a toad anymore. I've got, I've welded into it so many times. I've added rubber to it. And this one here I used in 2019, the Jolly Rancher. Actually, no, I think the Jolly Rancher I used in 2020. And in 2019, I believe I used this one, was black and green. And I actually grafted some other legs onto it from a different color because the legs were getting chewed up. But we were big users of Medusas early on, like a lot of people were. You know, there wasn't a lot of choices for rubber, and we used a version of that exaggerated hard rip. Even with bulldogs, a lot of guys were hard rip, and get it up to the boat, and then, you know, kind of pause by the boat. It wasn't until I got the Lake X Toad and started to see, by moving slower, more like a dive and rise, that those fish were hitting a lot further out from the boat, and we were getting just hard strikes. They were hitting so hard, and it was something that over the course of 2018 and 2019 that I started to adopt that style for other lures. I actually have a clip here of, I believe it's 2021, we went up to Long-Legged, and I was using a regular Medusa in black and orange, not Sunset Jailbird, and I was using it more like a toad and less like that classic Medusa rip. Ended up with two really nice 45-inch fish that trip on the Medusa, but it was using it more like a toad, and it was that motion of using that slower pull pause that helped me with a lot of baits that we use today. The opening clip of the video, you hear me say that I went to the toad as an old school lure. It's hard to believe that in 2022 we would think of a toad as an old school lure, but at that point, people were starting to use other lures, and John wasn't making them as available, I guess. That's the easiest way of putting it. And we had went, and if I look through my notes here, 2020 caught a lot, and the Jolly Rancher color, I believe is what it was called, was the color I was using. And then 2021, we got away from using actually a lot of rubber. We were using a lot of dive and rise and bucktails. But then in 2022, the very first fish I got of the year casting was on a toad, and the very last fish I got that year casting was on a Toad XL. And that was part of a 7-fish day where we got 6 on suckers, and I got 1 casting, and I actually lost another one on the toad. But the middle of that summer in 2022, we were out with our buddy Danny, and in that opening clip, you hear me say I was going old school, and I went to a toad, and I think it was a black and orange one, and I got 2 of them basically on back-to-back casts, which was really cool, but it just picking the right spots for lures like toads, especially up here on Shield Lakes, is really important. And it's just having the confidence to go to a style of lure like that and knowing how to use it. It's always been one of those lures that I always rely on. I know that in a pinch I can grab one. I know how to work it. I know what to expect out of it. And we fast forward 1 year into 2023, and my buddy Matt Vavrock come up here and came fishing with me, and we had an awesome day. I had a 5-fish day. I got a couple on a tube. Matt got a couple on a Ridgeway, and I got one on a toad on basically a fish that had followed on Matt, and I just dropped the toad down and I started jerking it up, and it hit it. But it's a lure that I've kind of drifted away from. It's always in my box. We use it in certain spots, but the really cool thing for me is that learning that slower presentation versus, say, a Medusa or some of the guys that really rip those dogs hard has allowed me to transform how I use a red October tube. I use a red October tube a lot more like I throw a tube, or like I throw a toad. And then in the summer of 2024, when the pit bull came out, I was using a pit bull a lot like I was using a toad. And I've told people I always go back to getting that first batch of toads and seeing in that underwater footage that they react different to that hard rip. They just do not like those hard rips that you can do with a Medusa. These ones, they tend to roll over, or they just rip up on those super hard pulls. And we found that with that slower pull pause cadence, you could get these to do a lot more. People have asked me if I like the regular size versus the XL. Personally, I like the regular size. I just find it's easier to cast, easier to work, and for the most part, I find they're a little bit more predictable in the water. So that generally 9 times out of 10, I'm going to pick a regular size. A little bit later in the year, I would go with the bigger one because we're trying to match, you know, the bigger forage at that time of year. Spring of 2019, Kyla and I went down to the Odyssey in Toronto. It was in Bowmanville that year, and we hung out in the St. Croix booth with Bob Sterling, Kyla's St. Croix rep for Canada. He also had some Lake X lures in there, and he also had some River Slick lures in there. And a lot of people were walking around and asking about the Lake X toad. They were really new at the time, and I just thought it was really interesting that people instantly made the comparison to the Medusa. And I sat in that booth and I had our underwater footage on my phone, and I probably showed at least 50 people, probably more like 75 people, maybe even 100, because there was groups at times looking at our footage and showing them pictures. And this was before we were filming all our catches. So all I had was the underwater footage and pictures, net shots to kind of prove that we had had success. And nothing I've done really in the industry was as cool as moments like that, where people are asking questions on the lures that you use, and you got video and proof to show them that they work. And I seen people change their opinions of what a Lake X toad was while watching that video, while listening to us, and watching them walk out of the booth with the lures was very gratifying, because at that point we were working with John, and John's been a huge supporter of what we do at 54 Bus. So I thank John at Lake X a bunch for, you know, having the success we have. But seeing people buy into it was so cool. And over the years, we've shown so much with the Lake X stuff, and we've had so much success with it. It kind of speaks for itself. But I tell people, and even as I go into 2025, it's a lure that I'm always going to have in my box, because at any given time, I know I can reach for one and it's going to do what I expect it to do. But looking back on it, I look at so many lures that I use, whether it's Red October, whether it's, something even like a Bondy Royal Orba, when we don't get action on a straight retrieve like Kyla was doing last year, or my buddy John, and you start to just slowly kind of pause it, not letting it really fall, but just give it a little bit of slack line. That all comes from watching the toad underwater and using the toad. And it's just been such a cool experience for us to really lean on a style of lure, learn so much from it. And there's a few other lures that have really taught us something similar, and we may do some videos in the future talking about them as well. But I really thought that this was a good one to show you guys that, a lot of guys haven't bought in on the toads yet, and it's a bit of a shame. And for us, just learning that style of lure has helped us with so many other styles. And I think the message I would want to say here, guys, is don't be afraid to try something new, and try it in a new way, because we all get caught up doing the same thing with the same lures, or even trying to do the same thing with different lures. I was guilty of it here, trying to do what works with a Medusa on the toad, and that's not how we had our success. We were able to kind of think outside the box. I would just urge everyone, watch some videos, ask around, go out with a guide, see how he's using stuff. You're going to learn all the time. And for us, it was, again, I don't want to beat it over the head, but it was that underwater footage helped us so much see what we could do with this lure. It was just one of those things that was really cool for us. And I just hope that for us going forward, every time we get a new style of lure, that will remain open to trying it, somewhat new, trying a new, a new style of retrieve, and asking around to some of my friends that have had success on those lures, what it is we can do to replicate that. And further to that, that's why I started the Building Confidence series, to talk to the builders and get, right from them, what's the best way to use your lure. So hopefully you guys like that series as well. I think that's really informative on a bunch of different lures that, maybe you guys or us weren't really thinking of trying. So that, that's my hope there, is that we're all willing to try something new. In musky fishing, it's always, we're always looking ahead to the next greatest, best thing, and sometimes that misses the point. I just had Steve Hiding on recently, and he talked about learning the lures that you have in your box before you buy new ones, and I think there's so much value in that. This past season, we leaned on some old familiar classic lures and had a lot of success during a tough year by leaning into stuff that we already knew really well. And that's where a lure like the Toad really fits in. And it's the type of lure that, for us, we can lean in on when things are tough. Check out the video right here where we had just an awesome day tossing around the Lynac Toad. And until next time, 54 Bust is out of here, and we'll catch you guys out on the water. Later.